This is Kim Andrews,
And Molly Wade.
and this is Swimming in the Deep End for deep healing and peace.
We are here to have courageous conversations about our journeys so that we can all create lives overflowing with freedom and joy.
So, our last two sessions, recording sessions in May that were released in May, was me telling my story. And I told the beginnings, family origins, issues, trauma, dysfunction, all that good stuff. And then my story of healing and how I came to where I am in life now, certainly with a life overflowing with freedom and joy, which is our goal for ourselves and for you. And now Molly's going to tell her story.
Yeah, where to start? So, growing up, life was not as one would expect. There was a lot of moving around, a lot of instability, even though I love traveling now. Growing up, that caused a lot of distrust and just not knowing what was going to be happening next. I grew up with three other siblings, one older than me and two younger. There was no fun in the dysfunction. We tried to create that, but didn't happen. A lot of toxic environments in relationships, and growing up with some seriously wounded and hurt people, and realizing that later in my life, and parents who didn't know how to parent because they were never parented. So we grew up. My dad traveled because he moved a lot. He was in the military, and that brought in all sorts of people in and out of our house, or if we were on base. And I realize it now. They were masking a lot of their pain with addiction. So drugs and alcohol were rampant since I can remember. And so that was not uncommon for them to have parties. And my mom never worked outside of the home and just took care of the house as much as she was able, but also had her own addictions, and still to this day with those addictions. So growing up, I didn't have any good role models of adults in my life at all. And yet I took on the responsibility of being that for my younger siblings. And I was only doing what I knew to do, which wasn't much. And there's a cycle of just abuse and drugs and alcohol, and that's what life was. And that's where the foundations of my beliefs and my values were established. Just like for all of us in our lives, it's where we're growing up, good or bad. And mine, unfortunately, had definitely more negative than positive. There's some positive there, but
So, was the abuse between your parents?
lots started there. And then when I was younger, my mom trying to make ends meet, that's when human trafficking started. And that was really the start of my lack of self-worth, whatever I did have at that moment, and started that belief of my value was only worth the price tag. And that continued for years. And we'll definitely get into more of my story and things that had gone on. But to give you a little background and to help you understand for the next episode and where things have come now and the awesome things that are going on, it's important to know the steps that had to be taken to get there. And my past definitely created some obstacles. And so going from life, codependency, all these things played into that, and taking on responsibilities that weren't mine really, really messed with me. And the abuse definitely suffered with mental illness that I wasn't aware of until much later. And as you guys can imagine, life is just, if you're listening to this and you've gone through abuse and trauma, you know where all these issues can pop up. And so that was my life until about 16. And I had left and took off and came back at 17 for a couple months, realizing why I left. And at that point, I had so much guilt and shame for leaving the younger two there. They were not as involved in a lot of the trafficking as I was. And partly my younger brother wasn't because he was a male. So in my family, if you were a male, bad things didn't happen to you because being a male automatically equated you to this new higher level. And there was just respect given from the day you were born simply because of your genes and what you were physically. So not that he didn't go through anything, it was a different kind of trauma and abuse for him, more so than the trafficking and the physical abuse, just because men had authority and position, even if they didn't ask for it. So leaving, there was still guilt, my younger sister, and, not knowing what was going to happen. And also not knowing how, if I was to take them with me, what was I going to do with them? And so at 17, when I had left the second time after realizing why I left the first time, I got into prostitution and started staying in places I had no business staying and doing what I knew to do. I knew that my body was worth something to somebody and that would give me food. And I was on drugs and alcohol at the time and had been on drugs and alcohol for years before that when I was young. And so I did what I was taught. And even though there was guilt, the alcohol took the guilt away temporarily. And so it masked a lot of emotions and a lot of, pain that came with that life. And I kept going and going, and that went on for years. And I was still struggling with mental health and not being aware that I knew I wasn't perfect, right? And I felt pretty messed up. I just didn't know what was going on. And I didn't for actually some years later. And at one point, I think I was probably 19, 20, bouncing around from various houses. I had met some really great people during that time, and I kept them at bay though and kept them away because I didn't know how to have healthy relationships. So we only know what we're taught. So if nothing was ever demonstrated for us, we don't know what we're looking at, right?
Of course.
So, but I knew what pain and abuse was. And as much as I didn't want that, no one wants to be hurt. Part of me was drawn to it because at least it was predictable. If you were around me and you were drunk, I knew how you were going to act. And I could, in my mind, I could control the situation when there isn't any control. We tell ourselves there is. So when I late teens, early 20s, that's kind of what I subconsciously went and sought out because I knew how to function in dysfunction.
Yes.
I didn't know how to operate any other way. So while I met good people, I never allowed myself to get to know them or them to know me. And I probably created a lot of problems not knowing, like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't know. You're too nice. So I'm going to cause problems because I'm uncomfortable with the healthy. So that's what I did in my early 20s. And there's lots of things in between and lots of steps that have events that have happened in between there. And I think I was 21 and I had stopped drinking because I had drank so much before my 21st birthday. Being 21 was not as exciting as I had hoped it would be. And I had moved up north and really started getting some stuff together. Wouldn't say perfect. So when you go from one way of living to another, it was shocking and completely mentally just flipped me around. And things that seemed really small for people, what foot to walk on, brush my own teeth and do my own thing, going from having those choices from when the past that wasn't a choice, I completely shut down and actually forgot quite a few years because I had dissociated and just kind of wasn't connected with life. And so was up north for a while and realized it was way too cold for me. Too much snow all the time. And in 2011, in December, I moved down here to Texas. And I got down here from someone on the internet, a good person that I met, and had invited me to a life enrichment seminar because they thought I needed it. And at that time, I was very offended because I was like, I don't need anything. I'm great. When I really desperately needed some help. And so I got down here and went back to Minnesota for a little bit and got a letter and a check in the mail from the people I had met down here in Texas saying, when you moved to Texas, and gave me a check, and had no idea I was thinking about moving here. Nothing. They just did. And it worked out. A few months later, I was able to move down here, packed up my PT Cruiser, had a hitch custom installed on it so I could pull my motorcycle down here. Priorities. So many dishes and clothes up there. It's not even funny. But I brought what was important and made the drive down here. And that's really when things started to change. It, what's the good word? I was still in my addictions a little bit and still working on, value. What changed was I was willing to start doing the work. And so got a legal job, a few of them, fast food, doing what I needed to do. And that was the turning point of seeing myself outside of the prostitution, and that I could actually hold a decent, a normal job, even if it was just flipping burgers. I felt like I was being productive in a good way.
Yes.
At $7.25 an hour, but I was doing something and it was great. And met some great therapists along the way when I moved down here a few years after I got here. And that had been and has been part of my story and what has helped me. So no shame in getting professional help, hands down. So that's kind of what I started doing. It took a while. I got involved in a recovery ministry here, and I should back up. I didn't really grow up in religion at all. It wasn't something that was talked about, and if you did, it was kind of frowned upon and sometimes even punished because of their fear of people finding out. Not that they were against religion itself as much as they were not wanting to be found out by the authorities.
Oh.
So it was not encouraged for that reason.
Because they were still trafficking.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was not a encouraged thing at all. And so I was really hesitant, obviously, after I left, and okay, I'm making all these not so great choices and life. When I got here and things seemed a little more secure and settled, starting on that path, I still wasn't sure I wanted to go into a church at all. I wasn't sure what happened in them. I just really, had a lot of mixed thoughts. Some were true and some turned out to not be true in the furthest. So after the program that I had attended, that really got me started thinking about religion and spirituality and what that looked like. I didn't have anything to really compare it to. I didn't grow up, like you had grown up Catholic. I had no foundation spiritually. So I could walk into one type of, church or congregation not knowing if that was right or wrong or what they thought, because I didn't. Okay, cool. Sounds great. And that's kind of how my journey started into spirituality. And through that has come this healing and this path that I'm on now. So I had walked in like I said, part of this recovery ministry and found myself questioning a lot of things. And at first, it was more just going to be involved. I was like, oh, these people can admit that they're not perfect. They're probably good people, and involved myself in that way more from the community aspect than really focusing on my issues. I just needed connection, and I didn't know what I needed to work on. I didn't know what to do or where to start, but I knew I just needed connection with people that weren't out to hurt me or need something from me, that were just there.
So real deep,
Yeah.
honest connection.
Yeah. As deep and as honest as they would go and I would go. My first 4 or 5 months in this recovery program, I just said pass when it was my turn to share because I didn't know what to say. No one knew any of this ever. And so feeling, in a place to share it just seemed daunting. And I was like, oh, no. Even before we started this recording, I was crying. Things are a lot better now, but it's hard kind of going back through. And sometimes the tears really are more of an awe of like, wow, okay,
Look how
I've
far
done this
we've
hard
come.
work and it's working. And, so started seeking and going down that path. And like I said, healing included therapy and things and really getting out of denial, not knowing I was in denial, and started not reevaluating, but really actually for the first time started thinking about my worth. I think growing up, the lack of self-esteem and confidence and value in myself, it was never something that I lost. I'm not sure I ever had it until I started looking and going, oh, I just subconsciously think all these terrible things and these negative thoughts that had been just so ingrained, whether by my doing or others around me, and never really stopping to realize that I could think something different, and learning what healthy relationships were. It was like was a lost little puppy trying to figure this life out. And so through seeking and visiting different types of churches and different religious areas had led me to just question those things and really question what I believed on myself from a spiritual aspect, God. And I had heard all these things talked about, and it was never a disagree or agree. I just didn't know. And so because of my past and my codependency, I just went along with anything I heard. I'm like, oh yeah, I believe that. That's great. And never wanting to rock the boat, not wanting people to be angry or upset if I disagreed or had a question. So for years, I just accepted what was around and didn't, want to dig into maybe I don't believe that or maybe I do. I just followed the flow. I was definitely going with the current and had no desire to fight back or go the other direction. I just, that's what she's doing, then I'm going to do that too. We'll just go this way.
So this period of questioning was a whole new thing for you.
Yeah, because I actually allowed myself to question. So growing up, questioning things was a no-no, because who are you to question anybody? So I didn't question anyone about anything, even if there was that feeling in my spirit or my heart, like, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
It was a blip in my thought process, and you ignore it. You ignored your intuition 100%, because people that you're around are older know better. So why would you question that? And so I didn't. And, getting here has not been easy. And in part two, I'll go into kind of where I'm at now. But that was my life, not knowing how to have healthy relationships, not valuing myself, not allowing myself to even ask questions at all. And it's taken a lot. a lot of work. And, I've been in Texas for quite a while. So, yeah, that's just kind of my backstory. I won't get too much into the future, the here and now, the good parts.
So were you this whole time when you moved up north and then when you came here to Texas, are you in touch with your family? Or are you completely separated from them during this period, like in your early 20s?
I was willingly separated and cut off contact. However, the situation I grew up in isn't something you walk away from. So there was still contact on their end trying to be made, and that's part of the reason I continued moving. I didn't feel safe in changing my phone number and, running. And I definitely think there's a time and place for that. And once I was out of that, though, and it wasn't necessary, I still kept doing that.
Sure.
So, yes, I chose to break off contact completely and left the state miles and miles, thousands of miles away from where I grew up, or the most recent place I was at the time. And there was still, unfortunately, there's still some contact throughout the years. So, but yeah, no contact as much as humanly possible. So,
Was that a lonely time or were you relieved or is it some of both?
I think it was both. Like I said, you don't want to be in a toxic situation or abusive situation.
Sure.
And when you've grown up with that, subconsciously or consciously, you gravitate to that because it's familiar. Even if it's a familiar you don't want to be familiar with anymore, you are.
It's human nature.
And so to answer that question, it's both sides of the coin. There's that part, it was like, oh, I miss that. I don't miss the abuse, but I miss the predictability and the comfort I had because I associated comfort with abuse and pain. And then the other half, I'm starting to see, oh, not everybody does this. Not everybody talks like that. Not everyone responds this way. That's different. That's interesting. And so I was curious to know, while staying back about 10 feet out of caution. And so you have this dual thought process in your head, and these two beliefs they contradict each other. One's healthy, one's not. And you're like, wait a minute. So that was challenging. And there's still moments in life now I'm like, well, that's interesting. That doesn't match what I thought, what I believed.
Yes.
And having to challenge those thoughts when they pop up. So, but yeah. Any other questions about?
I think it's important because I've gone through this, that when we start to change or we're shifting in our lives, especially shifting to something healthier, that it can be, yes, it's something we want. And yes, we're being drawn because we have this inner voice that's saying, what I was in is not healthy and it's time to move. And yet, like you acknowledge, there's this discomfort because you're moving from something very familiar, and it's human nature to go with the familiar because it might be bad, but we know what that is. And I don't know what this other stuff is.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's important for us all to remember whenever there's a shift, it can be really uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It doesn't mean it's not healthy. And I know in my life, often that discomfort during a shift has made me run back for a little bit. Then I go, oh, no, that doesn't feel good. And then I go back to the healthy thing. But, there might be some back and forth, 5 steps forward, 7 steps back. And then the next time I go 10 steps forward, and then I don't go as far back the next time.
Right.
And I think the important thing is that we just keep moving.
Yeah.
Just keep moving forward as often as you can.
got to be able to have enough of the good stuff and good experiences, the healthy side, to help us not go back to the unhealthy and the toxic, and that takes time. It takes time to build that and experience that. And the more we focus and make those changes we need, it's outweighing the toxic stuff. You can get rid of the toxic stuff, but if you don't fill that void and that gap with anything, yeah, human nature is to run back to what you know. So for a while when I first got out, okay, so my immediate danger that I grew up in was gone. I didn't know what I should be seeking, so I didn't run back, but I ran to the same people that would treat me the exact same way. So it was one bad situation for another one. I just traded them.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I started letting go of some of the toxic stuff in relationships and allowing myself to get to that healthier place till it outweighed. But it took time. And for a long time, I felt like I was sitting on the fence. It's like, okay, I have a handful of toxic stuff and I have a handful of some healthy stuff. And which one am I going to pick today? Like,
Yeah. In this moment, what do I choose?
Exactly.
Yes.
Until that healthy option choice relationships became the thoughts I believed. And, that was my choice. And there wasn't a guessing game anymore of, well, where am I? Which side am I standing up on? So
It can take years. It took me years. It took me
still
decades.
is. I'm still
We're still on the
working
path.
on that. So, yeah, the path, the scene has changed, but the path is still here and still walking on it. So, yeah, but that's kind of my backstory. So,
I like your persistent nature, that there's at some point you recognized something within you that wanted goodness,
yeah,
that wanted peace, that knew, and I think all of us do, and a lot of people who have come from similar backgrounds like yourself and mine as well. I knew that that the relationship I was watching between my mother and father was not good. And I knew I didn't want that, but I didn't know what else there was, but I was sure that it wasn't that.
right.
And so it took me years to discover what the good stuff was. But for a time, I just had to trust myself, especially when I saw myself getting into similar relationships. And I'd be in it, and then a light would go off, and it'd be like, oh, okay, I recognize this. And then I would have to decide, am I going to stay and do this? Or is it time to leave because I want something healthier? And again, there's a shift. I'm shifting out of a relationship that's not so healthy. And it's scary because, then I'm going to be alone again. And life gets lonelier. And then I realize at some point I could be alone, but not lonely.
Yes.
And that having a peaceful life by myself was so much better than being with somebody in chaos and dysfunction. And not any fun in the dysfunction.
Yeah. Nope.
And
They forgot that part.
Risking being alone.
Right.
Risking being alone. And I wonder, when I think back, if maybe my parents couldn't risk that, being alone. But I also know that they also had religious reasons for not wanting to get divorced. And
Right.
that was a huge impetus for them not to do that.
Yeah.
And I get that. And I've had to live differently. And, I had to change my paradigm about God and spirituality and my own self-worth and my reason for being. And like you, questioning, not just accepting what I grew up with.
Right.
and wanting to create a whole new world for myself.
Yeah, that's exactly the path. And you had mentioned the fear of change or letting go and being alone. And a lot of us get stuck in that situation, or an unhealthy, abusive, toxic, however you'd like to label it, relationships and or situations, even with family members, doesn't necessarily have to be a significant other, because the fear of the unknown outweighs the pain and hurt that we're having.
Yes.
And for me, a lot of that fear, it wasn't so much the fear of I didn't know what was going to happen that was there, just the unknown. The fear came in of, and this didn't realize it at the time, I do now after some amazing therapy, the fear of having to possibly challenge my thoughts that maybe I didn't deserve this. That was more fearful. The possibility of having to believe something different about myself versus if I stay, it gets reinforced every day and I don't have to change. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to try to, question anything. So yeah, the unknown was fearful, but really it was the inner work that I didn't know that's what I was afraid of at the time. And it was. It's like, oh, if I go for healthy and make these changes, then that means I must not be as bad as I have believed I was all of these years. And that was more of a battle than adjusting to, to life in general and how people operate outside of dysfunction.
Yes.
That battle was much harder than working fast food and job, and it was easy. The mental and self-talk work was and still is the biggest change and the biggest challenge, yet the most beneficial and rewarding process. So, I have enjoyed sharing with you all, and I hope you have been able to get some encouragement. If you know me, you know I'm still here kicking. So part 2, I get to really dig into that more and where I'm at now and the amazing things that are happening and the work we continue to do.
Yes, we're going to continue to swim in the deep end. So we've changed from our original plan. We were just going to do our intro session on YouTube, and then the 2 sessions I did and these 2 sessions that Molly's doing, we were going to have on Patreon, but we decided to change up, and all 5 of these first episodes are going to be on YouTube because we wanted more of you to be able to hear more of our stories before we move to that next platform, and then you are paying a nominal fee to hear us on a regular basis. So we just wanted to give a little bit more to give you a taste of where we're going and how deep we're going, and we are swimming deep. I know I felt very vulnerable before, during, and after telling my story. And sometimes when I think of it again, being out there, I feel vulnerable again. And I'm sure it's been the same for Molly. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was crying on the first take. This is the second take, so.
Yes. So please tune in to YouTube and listen. And we will be releasing these 2 sessions that Molly is doing, the 2nd and 4th Saturdays of this month of June. Yep. And then we'll update you with where we're going in July. We're thinking about that, and there a lot of things could happen. One thing we're thinking about is possibly doing a conversation on Zoom for those of you who have listened, and let's talk about our lives and what things are impacting you and what things are you thinking about your lives, how you grew up, some of your own dysfunction and trauma, some of the issues you still have that still need to be healed, or maybe you've not moved into a healing place with much in your life, and we get that because we understand how hard it is to make that shift. So we are going to have some deep conversations at some point. So Molly and I are going to make some plans.
We are.
And we'll let you know how those are. Feel free to contact us at any time. I have my website on thecalltopeace.com, and both Molly and I are on Facebook. You can look me up as Kim, I believe it's Kim A. Andrews. And plus, you'll see our post, and feel free to comment.
Yeah, you can comment on YouTube. We have
Comment on
comments
YouTube.
turned on.
And you can comment on Facebook. And for a lot of you who know how to reach us, just reach out
Yeah.
because we are open.
And come find us on Sundays in Sexy.
So the question always is, are you going to sit on the edge with your toes in the water and make no significant change in your life? Or you can swim in the deep end with us and take another step closer to healing and peace, freedom and joy. We hope you'll join us for this journey. Thank you very much for listening, and you'll be hearing from us soon.
All right. Thanks.